G'day cunts, Dean from Blog for the Blood God here, and on today's episode of the BloodyOath podcast, we talk about the greatest faction ever to grace the tables in Warhammer 40k, and that is faction Khorne Daemonkin. We talk about some of the history of the faction, and some of the last times we saw it and what was in the old faction Codex, as well as some of the future potential for the Codex, what we'd like to see, some wish listings, some predictions, that sort of thing, as well as some interesting concepts that hopefully will prompt quite the robust conversation in the comments below. This is a little bit more conversationally driven than some of my previous episodes, so if you have any thoughts whatsoever on the subject, I would love to take this conversation further by having it out in the comments below. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy the episode.
Blog for the Blood God presents the BloodyOath podcast.
G'day cunts, let's get a conversation going, shall we? I want to talk about the greatest 40k faction ever to grace the tables, and that is Khorne Daemonkin. I want to talk about some of my predictions, some of my wish lists, some of my hopes and dreams for a potential upcoming Khorne Daemonkin Codex, and then I want to have a conversation with you guys in the comments about what you think and what you would like to see, and whether or not you even think getting a Khorne Daemonkin Codex is possible, likely, or even the right thing. Even desirable. So basically the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to go through my predictions. Actually, first I'll go through the history of Khorne Daemonkin, because not everybody's familiar with this faction, because it hasn't been around since 7th edition. So first I'll go through a bit of history, just a brief breakdown of what the faction was and how it operated on the table and what made it unique and interesting. Then I'll do my predictions, honest predictions about what I'm expecting, and then I'll wrap it up with my wish list and things that I would like to see and things that I think would actually be good for the game overall if they were included. So with that being said, let's get stuck straight into the history. So for those of you who aren't familiar, maybe you haven't been around since 7th edition, maybe you started playing in 8th edition, or maybe even started playing recently in 9th edition, you probably have never heard the phrase Khorne Daemonkin. And basically what that was is back in 7th edition, there was a codex that allowed you to take any Khorne unit. It had all of the Khorne units, regardless of if they were a Chaos Space Marines unit or a Chaos Demons unit. They basically put all of those units into one codex and made it the one faction. And this was relatively unique at the time. There wasn't many opportunities to sort of combine forces like that outside of taking multiple detachments and having allies and all this sort of stuff. So it was a really interesting and unique codex in that regard. And basically all it meant is like you could have a Bloodthirster as your HQ, but Khorne Berserkers as troops, which allowed the people who played Khorne to really dig deep into that narrative sort of play style. But one of the things that made it really unique is it had a unique mechanic in the codex called the Blood Tithe. And the way this worked was basically every unit that would have that Blood Tithe rule, every time it killed a unit or was killed itself, you would generate a Blood Tithe point. And also if one of your characters killed another character, you would kill or if one of your units killed a character, you would generate a Blood Tithe point as well. And basically what these Blood Tithe points were used for, they were sort of like CP in a way that they were a number of points that you would have that you could exchange for various benefits on the table. So these could be simple things like you could spend a CP to get reroll charges army-wide or abilities like that. It might be, 6s to hit, generate extra hits army-wide for, 3 or 4 Blood Tithe points. I can't remember them all off the top of my head, it was several years ago now. But it was that sort of concept where you'd spend your Blood Tithe points and you'd get various benefits. But you could also spend them to summon demons as well. And these ones cost a lot more in the Blood Tithe. So for example, I think it was 8 Blood Tithe points allowed you to summon a Bloodthirster. And this is before reinforcement points. So this is, you just got a free Bloodthirster, which was at the time, everybody initially thought it was really, really powerful, but then they sort of realized, well, in order for you to get 8 Blood Tithe points, you have to have killed 8 things or had 8 of your units die. And if 8 of your units have died, and now you're summoning a Bloodthirster, it's not that big of a deal because you're probably in the process of getting tabled. And if you've killed 8 of your opponent's things, and now you're summoning a Bloodthirster, well, chances are you've already practically tabled them, so an extra Bloodthirst is not that big of a deal. So it actually didn't really translate to that much of an impact on the tabletop in the regards of competitive play, but it was fucking cool as shit. Khorne Daemonkin got sort of a lot of fame, I guess, in the tail end of 7th edition, because when they started allowing people to combo detachments, you could actually run a big unit of Flesh Hounds and put a whole bunch of sorcerers in it, and then make a bit of a Death Star, which obviously not very fluffy, but very, very powerful. So that's the main use for Khorne Daemonkin, which obviously wouldn't translate over to this edition, because you can't put sorcerers in units anymore, so that wouldn't really take effect. So the challenges and the criticisms of the Khorne Daemonkin Codex don't really apply anymore. And I think a lot of the flavor that it provided could be ported over into a 9th edition Codex. So that's more or less a summary of what that Codex was, what it was about, and it was basically just a really fun, narratively engaging way for people who love Khorne and love the Khorne models, whether they be Chaos Space Marines or Chaos Demons. It was just a really fun way for them to really dig deep and engage in the narrative in a way that actually translates onto the tabletop. So some examples of this could be, because you would generate Blood Tithe when your units died, it allowed you to play like you would imagine a Khorne Warlord would play. Because you'd be like, oh, I'm going to take this unit of cultists and I'm going to charge it into your big unit of Space Marines, and I know they're going to die, but I don't care where the blood comes from. As long as shit is dying, I'm happy. You know, that's how a Khorne Warlord would sort of operate on the battlefield. So being able to play that way on the tabletop is really cool. Being able to go, well, there's an incentive there for me to actually have my cultists die. So it really did. It was really such an amazing codex, because it wasn't overpowered. It wasn't dominating the tabletops. So people weren't like, you know, bandwagon jumping to it. But those people who did love Khorne felt like they just received this amazing gift that allowed them to really fucking play the game the way they always wanted to. I think it's some of Games Workshop's finest work, and I'd love to see it return. So now let's talk predictions. I'm going to be blunt and honest here. I don't think we're going to get another Khorne Daemonkin Codex ever. I don't think they're ever going to do it. However, I think if they do, and there's a lot of people that are saying there's rumors that we're going to get a World Eaters Codex, which would sort of function similar. And they're also saying an Emperor's Children Codex, because at the moment, obviously, only Death Guard and Thousand Sons have their own codex. And whereas the Imperium, they have codexes for fucking everyone. So, yeah, there's rumors that those two legions are going to get their own codex. I personally think that that's a mistake, and I actually don't believe those rumors. I believe that what's more likely to happen is that they'll get rules in some kind of supplement, some kind of war zone. You know, there'll be a war zone something where they release an Angron model, they release maybe a new Berserker kit, and a war zone where there's that, and then there's also like some Grey Knights, or there's something else. All those rules combined, sort of like what they've recently done with Be'lakor. I think if World Eaters or any Khorne-specific warbands are going to get any rules, I think that's where they're going to come from. I don't think a new codex is the future. I think you'll be a Chaos Space Marine. It might even be like a Khorne Daemonkin thing in one of those supplements. It'd be like Armies of Renowned, Khorne Daemonkin, you know. And if you only take Khorne units, you know, you get the following benefits. It'll be something to that effect. Because I think a codex will be limited to releases where, like the Necrons, where they're like, here's a fuck ton of new units. Or ones where it's like you're an existing faction with existing rules and an existing codex that just needs to be updated for the new edition. So it'll be, I think, if it's, a full codex getting a revise or a full product line being released, then you'll get a codex. But anything outside of that, any updates, I suspect will be more likely to come through war zones. which is disappointing because a Warzone obviously isn't going to pack in as much detail as I would like to see in a Khorne Daemonkin Codex, but I think that's more likely where these rules would come from. Anyway, now let's tip into the fun stuff. So this is my wish list. This is if I worked for GW, this is what I would do. And yeah, so I would really like to hear your comments below, because I know there's a lot of creative people out there in this community, and I know Khorne Daemonkin is a bit of a cult classic. I know there's a lot of passionate people that really miss that codex and had a ton of fun with it. So yeah, I'd love to hear your comments below, but here's sort of my general thoughts on what I would like to see. So first, I'd like to see the new 9th edition codex format rolled out for Khorne Daemonkin. So this includes things like warband specific rules. So in the same way that Space Marines have like their chapters, and then they have their successor chapters, and then they have their custom successor chapter sort of build your own chapter matrix thing. I'd like to see something like that, where you've got your warbands of renown, your really famous ones that have a lot of rules, but then you also have just how to create your own warband. And I think that's particularly important for Chaos Space Marines and Khorne Daemonkin, because they operate almost exclusively as warbands. So it makes sense for them to be able to create their own, because there's fuckloads of them, because each Chaos Lord has his own warband. It's not like Space Marines where they have a rigid structure where everything's, you know, more or less the same. These are each independent group of warriors has their own fighting structure. So I'd love to see that. And in that, I would like to see World Eaters. So World Eaters weren't in the previous Khorne Daemonkin Codex. They weren't considered Khorne Daemonkin. They were separate. But I think that they could take this as an opportunity to push the narrative for World Eaters a little bit further, and point out that the World Eaters are crazed maniacs dedicated to Khorne, specifically dedicated to Khorne, and that, for me, that qualifies them as Khorne Daemonkin in the way that their kinship is with the demons. So yeah, I'd like to see World Eaters included as one of the warbands, and then a couple other warbands included, and then an ability to create your own. And what I'd probably do is something along the lines of, you know, there's like a whole list of traits, then there's the set in stone, you know, named warbands, if you will, and they would get 3 of those traits. Or you could create your own and pick any 2 of those traits. And that way you've got, like, you know, an incentive to take one of the existing warbands, but also an incentive to choose your own, because you might want to combo 2 specific ones that are not comboed in one of the named warbands. So some examples of things I would do here, and like a lot of people say that a combat heavy army, it's really hard to create a codex for, because their focus is so narrow that it's hard to create the diversity in play styles. But I think with Khorne Daemonkin in particular, you have the ability there, because you could have, like, one of the traits could be something like, you know, exploding 6s to hit in combat, right? Like your Whirlwind of Rage. But then you could have one of them is 6s to wound, or an extra AP, or an extra couple of AP. So now you've got 2 things that sort of function similar. They're both combat tricks, but they're different, and they allow the person to sort of pick which one they want to have, you know, as a preference in their list. Other things like, you know, maybe being able to have 1 D6 deniers, like what Sisters of Battle have. So, because Khorne is very anti-psyker, so having an army-wide, one of your warband traits is they fucking hate psykers, and they can shut them down. Abilities like, you know, re-rolling wounds against characters army-wide would be pretty cool. It's just things like that. You can do lots of, and then I would try and structure it so that you can build your warband around one of a few different types of narratives. So you can have like really powerful warriors, really fast warriors, or really sneaky warriors. Like, just because the Khorne Daemonkin, the crazy madmen, it doesn't mean that they don't ambush people. It doesn't mean that they don't use tactics whatsoever. And perhaps you'd have the World Eaters would be the more strategic of the warbands, because they're the ones that are holding on to that legion structure. Whereas the other ones are a bit more crazed and a bit more like renegade style. So one of the examples could be, you could have one of the warbands that's based around speed, and you could go, okay, well these warriors all get +1 to advance and charge rolls. That's one of their traits. And then another one of their traits is that they can declare charges after advancing. So you could have, and then there are multiple different options that can be selected when designing your own custom chapter as well. So you got your own custom warband. So you could have a custom warband where they can declare a charge after advancing, and they have exploding 6s in combat. Or you could make one that can get +1 to advances and charges and have +1 damage if they roll 6 to wound or something like that. So yeah, I'd have a whole bunch of different combat specific ones, a bunch of different movement specific ones. I'd have like the World Eaters redeploy, which is currently a stratagem. I'd have that in there as well somehow. I would have, and then I'd try and have some to do with the blood tithe as well. So like maybe one of the Legion traits or the warband traits is that, if they kill a character, they get 2 blood tithe instead of 1, or something along those lines, so that it's not overpowered. It doesn't just straight up double the amount of blood tithe they get, but it helps them out a little bit with that unique Codex specific mechanism, which is blood tithe. Or you could have something like they get, or another one could be, you could have both. Another one could be they get a 1 blood tithe point discount on their blood tithe usage. So that would mean that the single point blood tithe ability would cost nothing, but the 8 blood tithe one would cost 7 blood tithe. So that would be built around a warband that tries to spend all of their blood tithe really fast. They just spend instead of saving up. Whereas, yeah, so you could do all kinds of shit there. So the argument that it's, being a combat focused army is too narrow of a focus to have a whole codex dedicated to it, I completely disagree. I think there's tons of abilities there. So yeah, that sort of ties up the warbands, what I'd like to see there. The next one, which is probably important to touch on, I probably should have even touched on this first, is the blood tithe table itself. So I think this has to come back because it was so cool and it was so unique to this faction that made it what it is. But I definitely want to see some changes. So I would try to see the blood tithe take on a more similar role to the Sisters of Battle Miracle Dice. And this isn't just because I really like the Miracle Dice and wish I had them myself. It's just that I feel like that mechanic is much easier to balance than a blood tithe. Than the previous blood tithe. So what you do is you'd have it still generate your blood tithe points by killing units or dying. That would stay. But then what you'd do is you'd also have like warlord traits and relics that allow you to generate additional blood tithe points. But then on top of that, you would have those blood tithe points being able to be used for specific actions on specific units. Instead of the previous version, which was like army-wide benefits and summoning, I would probably keep the summoning in there to an extent, but I'd like to see, like, for example, it might cost 2 blood tithe points to give a unit the ability to charge after advancing. So you can spend the blood tithe points in the same way that you would, say, a stratagem to give a single unit a certain ability. And that way, the reason that that's important, I think, is because if you have army-wide benefits, if they're not strong enough, it's a waste. But if they're too strong, because it's too strong army-wide, it's out of control strong. So it's really hard to balance. Whereas if there's something that you can only use it once per battle round or once per command phase, for example, you maybe make it so that all of these are activated in the command phase and you can only do one. So you can't just go, cool, I'm just going to put it on everyone. If you can only do it once per command phase and you can only do it on like effectively one unit, it doesn't really matter if it's insanely overpowered, because it's not going to change the game, because it's only exclusively isolated to one unit. Whereas the old method was being army-wide. It was like if the abilities that were strong became really fucking strong really fast. So yeah, I'd like to see it function similar to the Miracle Dice. Obviously not like how the Miracle Dice, you roll it, when you generate one, you roll a d6 and then you can use that result later. I wouldn't have that. I would have just, when you generate a Blood Tithe point, you get a little Blood Tithe token, and then you can spend that Blood Tithe token to do various things. It might be spend a Blood Tithe token to increase the range, the result on your charge dice by 1. So, just the little things like that, which I think would be really cool. I would probably keep in the summoning, although what I would want to see with the summoning, because with 9th edition, obviously you have reinforcement points. And if you have reinforcement points that you've got saved aside so that you can summon in a Bloodthirster, it's like, because you're exclusively restricted to Khorne, you might as well just buy the bloody Bloodthirster. Whereas in the previous edition, you got the Bloodthirster for free. And in the current summoning method, if you want a Bloodthirster, that's fine, because you can either buy it in your list, or if you want, you can put the reinforcement points in there, and then that allows you to tailor your choice to your opponent. So you can go, I'm going to bring a Bloodthirster, or no, against this person, I want to bring a Lord of Change, or I want to bring a squad of Flamers, or I want to bring, because the current system for summoning lets you pick from any of the appropriate Chaos Demons. Like, obviously, a Tzeentch character can only summon a Tzeentch demon, but that's fine. You just have an unaligned Chaos Undivided character, and he can summon whatever the fuck he wants. So there has to be some compensation, I think, for restricting it to Khorne. So if you're, and not only that, not only are you restricting it to Khorne, but you're also spending Blood Tithe points to do it, whereas currently you can just summon if you don't need to have Blood Tithe points. So what's a way to make Blood Tithe points work with the summoning? And I think the simple solution is that if you summon using the Blood Tithe points, the unit that arrives can arrive maybe within just outside of 6 inches of the enemy units instead of 9. And that way it really does fix one of the core problems with summoning and with deep striking Khorne demons, and that is that you deep strike in, and unless you're a Bloodletter unit with a Banner of Rage, you're not going to make that charge. If you're fishing for a 9-inch charge off your Bloodthirster when he deep strikes in, he's not going to make it, more often than not. And now you've got a Bloodthirster who's just going to sit there and get shot. And then that's game over. Like, he provided no real value outside of, a bullet sponge. So, yeah, I'd like to see Blood Tithe points, like, you got, maybe you have 5 Blood Tithe points allows you to summon Bloodletters, 6 allows you to summon, like, Blood Crushers, and then, 8 allows you to summon a Bloodthirster, and maybe 7 allows you to turn one of your characters into a Demon Prince. That'd be pretty cool too. But these summons, I would say that they have to be placed within 9 inches of a friendly unit, or within 12 inches of a friendly unit, and not within 6 inches of an enemy unit. And now you can be like, yep, cool, it's worth saving your Blood Tithe points. It's worth just killing and killing and killing and killing until you get your 8 Blood Tithe points, so that you can then spend your reinforcement points and your Blood Tithe points to bring a Bloodthirster in within that range and get that charge from Deep Strike. It's still arguable whether that would be worth it, but I think that at least makes it an interesting choice and a narrative one as well. So yeah, that's the vision that I have for Blood Tithe points, is a mixture of unit-specific buffs, like the ability to advance and charge, or the ability to increase the charge distance, the ability to maybe increase their attacks damage output, spend a 1 blood tithe points if it's a single model unit, 2 if it's 0 to 5, and 3 if it's 5+. And spending those blood tithe allows you to, do 2 damage on a 6 to wound or something like that, or a mortal wound on a 6 to wound. So you could sort of dial up the damage by using your blood tithe. That'd be cool. Or, maybe blood tithe points if when your opponent perils of the warp, you can spend some blood tithe points to force them to take 2d3 wounds instead of just d3. All of these sorts of things that would function very similar to stratagems, only instead of costing command points, they would cost blood tithe points. And these would be blood tithe points that you would generate during the game. I guess the next thing to go into is units. Now, this is obviously wish listing, but I would love to see a new Berserker kit, obviously 2 wound Berserkers. I would love to see Berserkers riding Juggernauts. I think that would be super fucking cool. And also plenty narrative, like there's stories where that happens. You've got Chaos Lords riding Juggernauts. That's a thing in the lore. So I'd really like to see that on the tabletop. And I think there's massive potential for GW to do some amazing work there. I'd like to see a Khorne-specific cultist model in the same way that you've got Zangors, and now there's coming out soon as there's the Slangors, or they're in the Age of Sigmar at least. And I would just use the Khorne Bloodbound guys. The Blood Reavers, I think they're called. I would just use them because, I'm currently using them to represent my cultists. I think they make a perfect stand-in for a 40k Khorne-based cultist. But you'd use them and then you'd give them specific Khorne rules. Like maybe they'd be Strength 4 instead of Strength 3. Maybe they'd have extra attacks. But outside of that, they would fill the role of the cultists, because cultists are a very important part of the Chaos Arsenal, both in the narrative and in the game. So that's what I'd like to see there. There's infinite potential for new Khorne units. I'm not asking for an entirely new range. I don't even really want an entirely new range. I just want a few of the things that we've always wanted come back. I also wouldn't say no to a new Angron model, although I think that's more of a World Eaters Codex or a World Eaters campaign book, Warzone book thing than a Khorne Daemonkin book. So let's keep that separate. So that more or less sums up sort of the units that I'd like to see. There's lots of talk about, there's a few short stories that are really, really cool, where I can't remember what they're called, but it's basically a defiler that's also a troop transport for Khorne Berserkers, and they ride on top of it. And people are saying that they would really like to see that. I'm not sold on that as a unit, because why would you transport your Berserkers in something? Why would you transport your Berserkers in something that has more or less the same movement as them? Like, there's no real advantage to them being on it. And like they ride it, like they don't hop inside it, so that's kind of weird too. And I don't think they're going to release a model for that, so I think all of those things just tell me that that's just not going to happen, and I'm not really interested in it either. Some of the other things, so back on the wish listing for the Codex is obviously with 9th edition, one of the things that was lacking in the previous one was stratagems. Another way that the Blood Tithe could work is you could use Blood Tithe just as CP. But then maybe a stratagem might cost 1 CP or 3 Blood Tithe. So you could have each stratagem has 2 costs, and there's a CP cost or a Blood Tithe cost. That's another way that the Blood Tithe could work. But going into stratagems, some of the stratagems that I'd like to see, obviously you want to see stratagems that interact with the Blood Tithe. You want to see stratagems that interact with Psychers, and you want to see stratagems that allow the units to do things like, one thing I would really like to see is the ability to disembark after a transport moves, so that you can have your Rhino Rush style Berserkers as a feature. But obviously being a stratagem, you'd only be able to do it with 1 unit per phase. So it's not like army-wide, you're just going to be like, woo, I'm just going to fucking fly all these Rhinos forward and dump a whole bunch of berserkers on your front door, but it would be a lot more interesting being able to do it with at least one. Things like advance and charge, obviously, that needs to be in there. Things like, I'd like to see some kind of 3d6 charge. I'd like to see sort of like what the Bloodletters have. And obviously the other thing to note is that the Khorne Daemonkin have the demons in it as well. Like, you just take demons in your squads, in your army. So I'd like to see the same things like your Warp Surge, which gives you +1 to your invulns, although you'd increase that to, it gives a unit without an invuln a 5-up, and any unit that already has a 5-up changes to a 4-up. And that it costs 2 CP. And that way you're sort of blending the mortals and the demons together and making stratagems that work across both, which should be really cool. Yeah, so that's sort of the general stratagems that I'd like to see. I'd also like to see some form of transhuman, because, Khorne Berserkers used to have Feel No Pain. That used to be a thing. So, you could name it whatever the fuck you want to name it. You get creative with the name, but it'd be just basically, a transhuman can't be wounded on a 1, 2, or a 3. Some kind of use this in your command phase, and until your next command phase, they have a 5-up Feel No Pain or something. Yeah, that sort of stuff. Fight twice, obviously, I'd like to see that stay. I'd like to see, all of the World Eater's existing traits, like the ability to consolidate and pile in an extra 3 inches, that sort of stuff. Yeah, no real revolutionary ideas there, but I'd just like to see a consolidation of existing kick-ass traits. The next thing that's a new 9th edition thing, which I'd really like to see rolled into a Khorne Daemonkin book, is the unique secondary objectives that factions get. And I think there's 2 real standout opportunities here. One of them would be you generate victory points by spending Blood Tithe points, in the same way that Sisters of Battle can generate victory points by spending their miracle dice, by performing acts of faith. If you perform an act of fucking gore, you get your points, and that way it ties in closely with the unique game mechanics, and it encourages people to play that that playstyle, and encourages people to engage with what makes that codex cool. So you might get people bringing more small units, more MSU style, so that they generate more Blood Tithe points, so that they can achieve that secondary. And the other secondary that I'd like to see is an inverted version of one of the rulebook secondaries. It's one of the ones from one of the missions. I can't remember what it's called, but it's basically trying to keep your army alive. So you get, if you've got 75% or more of your army still alive, you get a certain number of victory points. If you've got between 50 and 75% of your army alive, you get victory points. So the goal here is to just stay alive. I would take that, flip it on its head, and make that a victory point. But I'd take it one step further, and instead of it being exclusive to your army or their army, I'd make it both. Because the whole idea of Khorne Daemonkin and Khorne in general is that he wants everything to die, not just enemy units. So what you do is the mission would be something along the lines of, at the start of the game, sum up the number of units on the table, both friendly and enemy. And then at the end of the game, work out what percentage of them was killed. If 25% or less were killed, you get no points. If between 25% and 50% of all the units on the board were killed, then you'd get 5 points. If between 50 and 75, you'd get 10 points. And if more than 75% of the units on the table were killed, you'd get 15 points. And that way, it's sort of, not only does it incentivize you to kill your opponent the way that Khorne would want you to, but it also disincentivizes your opponent from killing you, which is really interesting, because if they kill you, they're feeding into your Blood Tithe, they're feeding into your secondary, they're giving you all these victory points. Whereas So it creates, I think that creates a really interesting and complex strategic play on the table. Because your opponent might, knowing they're versing Khorne Daemonkin and knowing that you have access to that secondary, they might just take non-combative secondaries. They might take, you know, deploy scramblers or banners. They might take engage on all fronts, and then they might take, you know, while we stand, we fight. And now they don't need to kill you to get victory points. And then they just go stand on all the primary objectives and not engage, because that's how you really beat Khorne. You just don't engage. So that it's sort of interesting the way that would change the way people operate. And if somebody's optimized their list for killing things, and then they go into somebody who wants you to kill them, well, that obviously creates a problem for them. So I think that'd be really cool and really interesting. And it also, the other good thing about a secondary like that is it means that if you go first and you do a bunch of damage to them, now they're not going to kill you back as much. So you're going to end in that sort of mid-range. Whereas if they go first and kill you a bunch, you're not going to kill them back, so you're going to end in that mid-range. But either way, that works for you on your mission. Whereas currently it's like, if they kill you, that's only a bad thing. You know, there's in no way is getting killed ideal. Whereas if you had it my way, and if you had the Khorne Daemonkin rules, then you actually kind of want your opponent to kill you. So it's okay if they go first and they just fucking nuke half your army, because you'd be like, no, that's fine. I wanted that shit to die eventually. So that'd be really cool. And I think that's also one of the benefits of a Blood Tithe, is with the Blood Tithe, if you go first, you have no Blood Tithe at the start of the game. So you can't do that massive Alpha Strike damage. But if they go first and they kill a bunch of your shit, well, now in your first turn, you have Blood Tithe points, so you can then do massive damage back in like a reaction kind of way. So it means that going second isn't necessarily going to cost you the fight, because going second is fine, because if you go second, you'll have Blood Tithe points to spend straight away. Yeah, so that more or less sums up my thoughts on Khorne Daemonkin and what I'd like to see going forward, and what I'd like to see in a 9th edition Khorne Daemonkin book. But like I said at the start, I really want to hear your thoughts on this. So chuck a comment below and we'll get a conversation going. And I might even do a follow-up video to this where I share some of the best recommendations and suggestions from the comments in this video. And we'll sort of get a back and forth happening, which would be really cool. And as always, please like, subscribe, follow, all that good shit. You know what to do. Also, if you like this video and you want to see more content like this, head over to my Patreon and show us some support over there. We also have, I'll chuck links to all this shit in the descriptions, but we also have objective markers available on 3D6 Wargaming. So that's another great way to support the show, support the channel, whilst also getting something for your hassles. So check them out, and I'll talk to you guys next time. All right, see ya. G'day cunts, Dean from Blog for the Blood God here, and I've today received my first set of neoprene objective markers manufactured for me by 3D6 Wargaming. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to do a quick product review and also share a link in the description of this video for where you can purchase your own set today.
Blog for the Blood God.
Alright, to get things started, let's have a look at the objectives as they lay out. So as you can see, they come in quite bright, vibrant colours. All the details are nice and crisp, and they look fucking grouse on the table. So there's your 6 objective markers that you get in a set for $25. Now these ones are available on the website, but these are ones that I had made up for myself as sort of more of a promotional material than anything else. The other designs all have unique custom character designs to represent each faction in Warhammer 40k. So there's plenty of different designs on there, and we also have a service on our Patreon where you can go to purchase custom designs made for you. So if there's a special character you want to see, or a special gaming club design, you can get them available. You'll see there's, for example, the Potato Farmers is one that I made for a local gaming club, which is up on the screen now, etc. Onto the actual product. As you can see on the back here, we've got a nice grippy neoprene backing. So what this does, which is really important feature, is that it stops them from sliding too much. If they're that way, they slide really easily, but this side's got a grippiness to it, which means that you're less likely to accidentally bump them or move them during the game. One of the other features that you'll notice is that it has a ring within the inside of the objective marker. Now, all the different designs will have this, and basically what that is that's to represent that if you have a 25mm or a 40mm base in the center, the edge of the objective is exactly 3 inches from the edge of that marker on either side. So that allows you to use the 9th edition rules where you've got 3 inches from the edge of an objective marker. However, they've been future-proofed so that in the future, if Games Workshop decide to go back to the old method, which is 3 inches from the center of the objective marker, there is an inner ring which is 6 inches wide. And what that means is that you'll be able to use these in any edition as long as 3 inches is the metric. So if it's 3 inches from the center or if it's 3 inches from the edge, you have those measurements covered. All right, one of the other important features is that these are relatively thin. So as you can see, they're very thin. And what that means is that they're flexible, which means that they can sit over the top of some rough terrain like this crater or this edge here, and they actually sort of mirror the shape of the terrain that they're sitting on, which means that they can be on rough, dense tables and not cause any problems. Also, if your terrain is removable, you can set it up underneath. So it's entirely up to you what's more important to you, whether or not you want to be able to see clearly defined edges of the terrain or clearly defined edges of the objectives. But these objectives are designed to work with both of those preferences in mind. One of the other exciting features of these objective markers is because they're so thin, you can actually sit a model partially on the objective marker like so, and they won't fall over. So it's really easy to just be toe in on the objective and have stable models the whole way around. So these are very well optimized for miniature wargaming. One of the other great features of these objective markers is that they are all numbered from 1 to 6. So this allows you to play different missions depending on what game system you're using, where it might be a old school Maelstrom of War style mission, or there may be some other Crusade rule style missions that you play where having specifically numbered objectives is very valuable. And it also allows you to communicate clearly with your opponent. So you can say, I'm going to shoot at the guys that are holding objective number 6. And that way your opponent can see clearly what's communicating, clearly what's happening, and it just makes for a much more smooth and seamless gameplay experience. So there you have it, cunts. Hope you enjoyed this quick little brief review of the objective markers that are available for sale on 3D6 Wargaming. I'll chuck a link in the description to below where you can get all of the custom designs that I've made for Warhammer 40k for every faction, and also a link to our Patreon where you can request custom designs, be that one for your gaming club, or be that one of a special character that you want to see represented, or a special unit that you're particularly passionate about. Jump over to our Patreon and we can do up any design you can imagine, and I'll talk to you next time.
Plug for the blood god.
Do your objective markers ever get lost behind terrain or other models and become difficult to see? Do they ever get bumped and accidentally moved during a game? And do they ever spark arguments about distances? Well, not anymore. Introducing the blog for the blood god, not even remotely patented Neoprene objective markers. Made from the same material as astronaut suits, or maybe military equipment, or probably neither of those things, this 2mm thick neoprene synthetic rubber is tear resistant, water resistant, and is designed to last. But that's not all. The blog for the blood god, not even remotely patented neoprene objective markers come in a variety of different designs and styles to suit any faction represented in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. These objective markers are a perfect gift for yourself or a friend, and are a perfect way to flex and show your opponent that not only are you a smarter, cooler, and better 40k player than them, but you also have more disposable income than they do. For the low price of $25, you'll get not 1, not 2, but 6 neoprene objective markers perfectly designed for 9th edition Warhammer 40k. But wait, there's more. For a limited time only, people who sign up on Patreon to support Blog for the Blood God as a Skull Champion tier $5 per month member will gain access to a custom design service where I will design a unique logo to support their gaming club, like the one I did to the left here for the Potato Farmers local gaming club here in Melbourne. Follow the links in the description of this video to pick up your